This confession by Alec Baldwin is likely going to lead to his criminal conviction.
Or should I say, who handed you your weapon in the day?
Hannah.
Hannah did. Okay. And physically handed or put it in the holster?
Handed it to me.
Okay.
She would show me the gun.
Okay.
Or she'd say, Cole gun. She'd say, test it, or some language to indicate she handed me the gun, that it was fine. And she'd say, do you want to check?
Okay.
And I always didn't want to insult her. I said, because we never had a problem.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm good.
Alec Baldwin is a Hollywood actor who's played in many roles, including, for instance, the last couple of Mission Impossible movies. Now, he is being charged with involuntary manslaughter, which if convicted could lead to a minimum 5-year prison sentence. Now, you have some people on the left claiming this is a political prosecution because Alec is an anti-gun Democrat.
The DA who is indicting him, or whatever the legal term is right now, she's a big Republican. I'm only saying this because Alec Baldwin is a target for Republicans. They cannot stand him.
Now, this is totally wrong because the district attorney in New Mexico is a Democrat, a George Soros Democrat. Here she is from her official website, and she is, as you can see here, a member of the Democratic Party. So that destroys this argument of political prosecution. Now, let me explain why Alec Baldwin is likely going to go to jail. Now, to do this, we're going to look at the law, the facts, the legal issue, how it's being applied in this case, and the conclusions that are being reached. So first, let's start with the law. So what is involuntary manslaughter? Well, here is the New Mexico statute on involuntary manslaughter. And it reads, involuntary manslaughter consists of manslaughter committed in the commission of an unlawful act not amounting to a felony, or in the commission of a lawful act which might produce death in an unlawful manner or without due caution and circumspection. Now, this last piece, without due caution or circumspection, is going to be very important to our analysis. The next thing I want to do is define risk. Risk is a situation involving exposure to danger that can cause death. For instance, driving into a crowd of people. Now, involuntary manslaughter has both an actus reus component and a mens rea component. Actus reus is the criminal act, mens rea is the guilty mind. Now, to be convicted in New Mexico for involuntary manslaughter, you have to have an unintentional killing where the defendant creates an unjustifiable risk. The mens rea component is the defendant must be aware of the risk and the defendant must disregard that risk. But how did I get this rule? First, I went to this case from the Supreme Court of New Mexico, State v. Skippings. In that case, the court defined involuntary manslaughter as this: the unintentional killing that results due to 1, the commission of any unlawful act not amounting to a felony that causes death, 2, the commission of a lawful act that might produce death in an unlawful manner, or 3, the commission of a lawful act that might produce death without due caution and circumspection. So as you can see, the actus reus component, the first element is an unintentional killing. And the second element is the defendant creates an unjustifiable risk. Now, we got that from State v. Skippings. No matter if it's an unlawful act or a lawful act, we're really talking about an act that might produce death without due caution and circumspection or in an unlawful manner. So that essentially says risk, a situation involving exposure to danger that might produce death. So we took all that and just made it the defendant creates the unjustifiable risk. So the requirement for the actus reus is that you have an intentional killing where the defendant created the unjustifiable risk. Next, the court goes on to the mens rea component. In New Mexico, the state must show at least criminal negligence. And then the court defines what criminal negligence is. 1, the defendant acted with willful disregard for the victim's safety. And 2, was subjectively aware of the danger or risk his actions posed to the victim. So he thereby acted with criminal negligence. Again, that's State v. Skippings. And as you can see, the mens rea component has the defendant was aware of the risk and the defendant disregarded the risk. Now, this chart just makes it easier for us to go through the elements. Now, classic examples of involuntary manslaughter would be a roller coaster ride operator who fails to strap in passengers properly, causing the death of a passenger. That would be involuntary manslaughter. Or firing a gun into the air or into a crowd, causing someone to die. In each one of these examples, the defendant created an unjustifiable risk, either not strapping in the passenger or pointing a gun into a crowd. The defendant was aware of the risk, because if you don't strap someone into a roller coaster, they can die. If you point a gun at someone, they can die. They disregarded that risk by either not properly strapping in the passengers or pointing the gun at someone, and then someone actually dies unintentionally. So now we have a better understanding of what involuntary manslaughter is in New Mexico. Now with that, let's look at the facts. So here's the initial police interrogation of Alec Baldwin and a reenactment by the victim's family. We're going to play them side by side so you can see both the visual and listen to what Alec says about what happened that day. So let's start at the beginning. Who handed Alec Baldwin the gun that day.
Or should I say, who handed you your weapon in the day?
Hannah.
Handed it. Okay. And physically handed or put it in the holster?
Handed it to me.
Okay.
She would show me the gun.
Okay.
Or she'd say, cold gun. She'd say, test it, or some language to indicate, she handed me the gun, that it was fine. And she'd say, do you want to check?
Okay.
And I always didn't want to insult her. I said, because we never had a problem.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm good.
Now, what did we just hear? Alec Baldwin has just admitted that he was handed a gun by the armorer, he was asked to check the gun for safety, and that he declined to do so because he didn't want to offend the armorer. Now, this is a clear admission that Alec Baldwin was aware of the risk, and he disregarded that risk when he said he wasn't going to check the gun, and someone was killed. Alex is now going to tell us what happened next.
It's Hannah again.
They armed me, and you're assuming, as we've done every time, that it's a cold gun for the rehearsal. And I put the gag in the shot, you're the camera, because I have a coat, and I have a holster, and I pull the coat over, and I kind of cup my hands like I folded my hands. And then I'm going to slowly sneak the revolver, the Colt out, and turn and shoot these other guys, or try to shoot them. I take the coat over the thing, the camera's there. I believe, my recollection is she was there, turned a bit, like talking to him. So I think she was hitting the right armpit. But this is all I know, and that is that I take the gun out in the rehearsal. He wants it very dramatic and very slick, I'm trying to sneak up on them. I take the gun out, and as I take, as it clears, as the barrel clears, I turn and cock the gun over here. I turn and cock the gun goes off. Okay. It's supposed to be a cold gun. Nothing. No flash charges, nothing.
So now we have a very clear picture of what happened in that moment. Alec was handed a gun by the armorer. The armorer asked Alec to check the gun for safety. Alec declined to check the gun for safety. Then Alec pointed the gun at someone and shot them. So now we've looked at the law. Now we know the facts. Let's look at the legal issue that comes into play. Here, we got to give the standard notice that a jury of Mr. Baldwin's peers will determine his guilt or innocence. And at this point in time, he is innocent until proven guilty. And last but not least, this is not legal advice. This is just an academic exercise in understanding involuntary manslaughter. So the legal issue here is, did Alec Baldwin commit involuntary manslaughter? So to figure that out, let's apply what we know about the law, the facts, and the issue at hand. So to be convicted of involuntary manslaughter, we need the actus reus, an unintentional killing, and the defendant has to create the unjustifiable risk. And then we also need the mens rea, where the defendant was aware of the risk and the defendant disregarded that risk. So the actus reus is pretty clear, right? We do have an unintentional killing, and the defendant created that unjustifiable risk by pointing a gun at someone. Simple enough. Now, for the mens rea component, we have to ask two questions: whether the defendant was aware of the risk and whether the defendant disregarded the risk. So let's start with whether the defendant was aware of the risk. Now, in this interview, Alec is going to tell you that he knew of the risk of pointing a gun at someone and pulling the trigger, no matter if it's loaded or not. Listen to what he says.
In the script for the trigger to be pulled.
Well, the trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger.
So you never pulled the trigger?
No. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger at them. Never. That was the training that I had. You don't point a gun at me and pull the trigger.
So yeah, based on Alex's own words, he was aware of the risk of pointing a gun at someone and pulling the trigger. And also, the law presumes that you're aware of the risk if you have a firearm, a working firearm, and you point it at someone, right? Because a firearm is an inherently dangerous weapon. So you can't say you didn't know it was a risk to point a gun at someone. The risk is inherent within the weapon. So now in looking at our elements, I think we pretty much have the actus reus, the intentional killing, and the defendant creates an unjustifiable risk. And we have our first element of the mens rea, where the defendant was aware of the risk. Alex says he was aware of the risk. But now what about the defendant disregarding this risk? Now this is where the legal battle happens. See, it's going to come down to whether Alec was required to check the gun before operating it. Remember, he was handed a real gun. Think about it. If Alec were on a gun range and someone handed him a gun and told him it was empty, if he then pointed that gun at a wall and pulled the trigger and someone was killed, Alec would be responsible because he didn't check the gun. It doesn't matter if he was at home, a store, a gun range, or even a movie set. If someone hands you a deadly weapon like a gun, you check it for safety. Now, with that said, Alec made a critical admission to police. Remember? He admitted to willfully not checking the gun when he was asked to check it before the accident. Listen to it again.
Who handed you your weapon in the day?
Hannah.
Handed it. Okay. And physically handed or put it in the holster?
Handed it to me.
Okay.
She would show me the gun.
Okay.
Or she'd say, cold gun. She'd say, test it, or some language to indicate, as she handed me the gun, that it was fine. And she'd say, do you want to check? And I always didn't want to insult her. I said, because we never had a problem.
So he was handed a real gun by the armorer. She told him to check it. He refused to check it, and he accidentally shot 2 people. And that admission fits right into the prosecutor's main argument. Here she is explaining it.
What were some of the key pieces of evidence that you used that factored into that decision?
Well, that there was such a lack of safety and safety standards on that set, that there were live rounds on set. They were mixed in with regular dummy rounds. Nobody was checking those, or at least they weren't checking them consistently. And then they somehow got loaded into a gun, handed off to Alec Baldwin. He didn't check it. He didn't do any of the things that he was supposed to do to make sure that he was safe or that anyone around him was safe. And then he pointed the gun at Helena Hutchins and he pulled the trigger.
Pretty cut and dry. Here's the DA using the language of the law to explain why she charged Alec Baldwin.
The first part of the involuntary that we'll be charging is that they acted without due caution and circumspection, meaning they weren't just negligent in their duties, but that they were on notice, that they had duties, and that they should have done or not done something that didn't happen on that set, meaning they should have checked the bullets. They should have checked the gun. They shouldn't have even been using a live gun that day. They should have been using a rubber or a plastic gun. All of these things go together and show that there was just this complacency, lack of care on that set, and it's more than negligence, and I would say it rises to recklessness.
Now, Alec's defense is going to be focused on one main point, that he relied on the armorer and other professionals to check the gun and do their job, and that he's the victim of their failure to do the job that they were paid to do. Here is a supporter of Alec trying to explain his position.
When the prosecutor said that Baldwin should have checked the gun, that is not the actor's responsibility. The actor puts a great deal of trust in us, the armorers and the prop department, to make sure that while we make it look as real as humanly possible, we also make it as safe as possible. And he was assured by a crew person, the first AD in this instance, that that gun was, quote, cold, or didn't have any blanks in it, or wasn't dangerous, and he acted accordingly. So he may have liability, but he put his trust in our crew, and that crew person, the armorer and the AD, failed him terribly.
Here's Alec Baldwin's lawyer responding to the news that he's being charged. Listen to what they say.
Baldwin's attorney saying Alec, quote, relied on the professionals with whom he worked, who assured him the gun did not have live rounds. We will fight these charges, and we will win.
On one side, we have Alec Baldwin saying that he reasonably relied on the professionals and he was unaware of the risk to any of the victims because he believed the gun was empty. And on the other side, the DA is saying that's irrelevant. Anyone who's handed a gun must check it themselves before pointing at someone. And in this particular case, he was asked to check the gun by the armorer, and he declined to do so. Now, here's my opinion on it. Alec Baldwin is likely going to either go to jail or going to plead guilty. Now, the fact that he was directly asked by the armorer to check the weapon before the accident and he refused to do so is really all you need to know. Now, I believe Alex would have a stronger argument if he wasn't asked directly by the armorer to check the gun before the shooting. But since he was asked, check the gun, make sure it's okay, and then he disregarded that risk and didn't check it, then I really think he's going to be found criminally liable in this particular case. Unless he can sell to a jury that in that moment when he was asked to check the gun and he refused to check it, he's not responsible for what happened next. Let me know in the comment section if you agree. Let me know if you disagree and why. My name is Nate the Lawyer, and I'll see you next time.